Thank you for thanks for having me. I appreciate all of you. It's good to see some friends. To those that are my friends and family that are on, go ahead and shout out in the notes so I know that you're here. Always good to see folks like people that are in the belly of the beast doing the work, like Anna McNaughton and Gretchen Andrews. And I love when I see Gretchen and Shaheen together. That's always fun. And DC for sure, and Angela, of course. And then my main man, Eddie Tejeda. Good to see you, my friend. And Stephanie's my new friend, and I congratulate you, Isabella, for what you're doing, being a student rep. I mean, you're starting off pretty pretty advanced group. So what I thought that I would do is just try to give you some tools, forks, spoons, knives that help you break down some of these issues. Oh my word, I got people checking in from Georgia and everything else. Lord have mercy, they're late. So they're it's 9:30 out there. Lord have mercy. Um, I was gonna make a joke about I'm so glad it's a day late and it's not, the same time as the Super Bowl. But as it turned out, if it was the same time as the Super Bowl, a lot of us would have been watching it. So Super Bowl was not fun. But in any event, so I want to talk about a goal, and then I'm going to talk about steps to the goal. Those are the forks, the knives, the spoons, as it okay. And so I want the goal to be creating safe spaces for having difficult conversations related to justice issues, including racial justice. Okay, that's going to be the goal. Creating safe spaces for difficult conversations. So I'm going to start off with a couple of um, questions to ponder, and I'm going to ask them at the beginning, and then I'm going to ask them at the end. And so hopefully uh, there is a before and after with what you're thinking. Now, I'm making an assumption with folks, and I don't know if your meetings are usually this big, but we look like we're rolling pretty deep here. So I'm making an assumption. And the assumption is that the people that are here want to have these discussions. Okay. Now, sometimes what happens, and with the HRC and what you guys are doing, I congratulate you on it. It's really important. I foresee you guys being a vehicle towards having this conversation, and getting the engine going, and letting it go and letting it run. So that's my assumption now, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. But sometimes, oh yeah, by the way, shout out to my wife too. I don't want to get in trouble. She's right downstairs. If I don't say hello, couch, bro, couch. So, hi, honey. So, she told me to wear this shirt. So bless you. So my assumption is that you want to have this conversation. You're going to find, as I'll discuss later, that sometimes people don't want to have the conversation for different reasons. All right. But I'm assuming that those of us that are here do want to have the conversation. So here's what I want to do is give you some knives and forks, and some spoons. So here's a couple questions to ponder, and I'll come back to these later, but I kind of want you to think about these in terms of your frame of mind. How do you see your ethical duty in your life and in your community as it pertains to justice issues, including racial justice? How do you see your ethical duty? Because as I mentioned, you have one, okay? Second, are you in your comfort zone as to justice issues, including racism? Are you in your comfort zone? When you're talking about justice issues and you're dealing with justice issues, how comfortable are you with it? Next, when you see someone different, however you define different, doesn't look like me, doesn't think like me, whatever the case may be. But for racial purposes, let's say, doesn't look like me. You see somebody different that's successful, do you see an exception or do you see possibilities? Okay. And here's the last question I'm going to ask you to start with. Will you be moved off the dime, as it were, so to speak, by conscience or by circumstance? So, like Stephanie said in the introduction, I am running a new practice group in an established law firm called McCune Wright Arevalo for racial and economic justice, and that has a few heads. It's a three-headed monster. One is advocacy, one is community contact, and one is litigation. The way the litigation looks are consumer class actions, um, employment discrimination, employment issues on behalf of plaintiffs, as well as civil rights. Okay. A couple things on the horizon for us. One of the things we expect that we may be getting involved as it pertains to issues relating to crime-free housing ordinances in cities, for instance, where people are discriminated against because of a nonviolent criminal record, either on the front end or they're thrown out on the back end, more disproportionately to people of color because they call for service or because someone has been arrested. And there's some depth to that. And if people have questions related to that, I could talk more about it. We're also looking hard at, we're still paying attention to things that are going on in PPP, the payroll protection plan, where disproportionately businesses of color were shut out. And that's why a third of them that existed in March, a third to a half, are not there anymore. We are looking for wrongs to right. And it's pretty neat to be in a job where you get to do that all day, every day. And so let me talk a little bit about justice, how a lot of people, deal with that term justice. If you remember, they had the Hall of Justice on the Super Friends TV show, cartoon when I was little. I tried to explain that to Joy. She didn't know anything about it. She said, I was always in dance class. I didn't see any cartoons. I tried to show her Scooby-Doo, being romantic. She'd never seen it. Sometimes I don't know how we made it. But in any event, justice is the maintenance of an administration of what's just. That's justice. And just is the act or being in conformity with what's morally upright or good. So we want to get to creating safe spaces to have difficult conversations. But here's some steps to the goal, okay? One is recognizing ethics. That's thing one. And it might be the most important one. Second one is listening better and seeking dialogue. The third one is embracing balance. And the fourth one is doing the work of nuance. So those are the steps to our goal. And I'm going to break those down a little bit. Okay. So a lot of times you think of the word ethics and people think, well, what do you think when you think ethics? My wife says I'm awesome, but silly all at once. They're about 30 years running, actually, for sure. That's it. So ethics is a set of moral principles or a theory or system of moral values. And conduct is a mode or standard of personal behavior, especially based on moral principles. So if your conduct should be ethical in its nature. And I pose another question to you to help frame why ethics is so important. Now, if I'm walking down the street and I see someone laying there that's in obvious distress and they need help, I know they need help, but I also know that I didn't put them there. I had nothing to do with putting them there. And under the law, I have no legal obligation to help them because I didn't create their peril. What do I do? Now, most people will know, even though I had a case where they didn't, and that's a separate thing, but most people will know that the thing to do is to help somehow. Maybe render aid, maybe call 911, right? If anybody would disagree with that, you might be at the wrong speech, but that's what you're supposed to do. But let's put that in the context of racism. Because what I'm getting at here is that a lot of times we are looking at the legal ramifications of something, and even though that's very real, where we need to go is we need to look at the ethical ramifications of things. What is the right thing to do? So racism has a million definitions, but the one that I'll use for our purposes is a belief that personality, behavior, and morals can be traced back to race. You are how you are because you're Black, because you are Latino, because you are Native American, because of you are fill in the blank. And it could be anything. We could be talking about racism, sexism. We could be talking about LGBTQ issues. We could, you are this way because this, all right? And I asked my dear friend who I look up to, Overseer Lavanzo Gray, who I believe is on here with us. He said, Joe, I'd like you to deal with the difference between racism and discrimination. And I would do that very briefly by saying that racism is a belief, but discrimination is action. Basically, racism made real. Okay. But notice that racism being that belief in and of itself, it's not actionable. I can't sue somebody because of what they think, because of how they feel. Okay. And just because somebody is racist does not necessarily, it certainly gives them the potential to be discriminatory. But in and of itself, that feeling does not by itself lend to legal liability by itself. However, because discrimination is racism made real, this is really why that we have to deal with it. Now, I'm going to go back for a second to what I mentioned in terms of the hypothetical person laying on the ground. You didn't create the peril. You don't have to help them, but you know that that's the thing to do. There's a dramatic irony here that I want to talk about. And the dramatic irony is something my 10th grade English teacher, Miss Ray, used to talk about all the time. We would read a story and she would say, name the dramatic irony of the story. In other words, it seems this way, but it's actually this way. What is the dramatic irony about these steps that I'm talking about, the steps to the goal? The dramatic irony is in our society, they're not universally regarded as necessary for success as people define success. And another dramatic irony is that in and of itself, there's no legal ramifications automatically for doing it wrong. There's no legal ramifications for you thinking wrong. There's no legal ramifications for you not embracing balance. There's no legal ramifications for you not recognizing ethics. Could it have a legal thing in action? Yeah, down the road. But there's no legal ramifications for you not using nuance, employing nuance. But what I'm telling you is, it is just as important as understanding that that person lying on the ground needs help and we need to help them. It's just as important for us to deal with justice issues, including racism, even though from a societal standpoint, from a legal standpoint, we don't necessarily have to. So we don't have to, but we need to. That's why I'm getting at. Why racism has to be approached morally. Because what people think is not illegal, but it can be damaging, it can be an impediment to progress, and ultimately it can be lethal. Another reason, and there's a million of them, but another reason why racism has to be approached morally is because we won't make the progress we need to as to racism unless we approach it morally. That's the way we've got to do it. We're talking about doing the right thing. We're talking about proceeding morally. There was a moral component. My wife's dad, Jim Robinson, was one of the first Black lawyers in the state of Texas all those years ago. And one day in the 60s, he was riding on a plane, and I'll be doggone if he didn't have a seat next to Martin Luther King. So they get in a conversation, and by the time they're done having a conversation, Jim felt like it was incumbent on him to pack his stuff and to move down to Atlanta and be part of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And one of the things that he'll talk about, because he had Andy Young send me the book, and he's like Uncle Andy to Joy and this whole thing. One of the things that they talked about is that the movement always had a moral component. Why? Because we want that to be available, because some people will be moved by conscience. Other people will be moved by circumstance. I'll talk more about that, but some people will be moved by conscience, okay? This is why George Floyd was important. A lot of folks don't grasp this. We saw up close hate and indifference to life. I really believe I saw evil in the eyes of that man who had his knee on George Floyd, because he was looking at the camera. And probably didn't think there would be any ramifications for him doing what he was doing, or it certainly didn't become enough of a thought where he'd stop. And COVID gave us an audience. Everybody had stood still. So it was a little bit different than Rodney King, which I remember. It's really a little bit different than some of these other things, because we were going and going and going. A little bit different than Trayvon Martin, a little bit different than Philando Castile, a little bit different because we were all stopped and we all saw it in real time. But it's given us an audience and an opportunity to remember that we need to approach this ethically. Because, by the way, I'm on the legal side of things, right? I sue people. And long ago and far away, my previous firm, we actually sued the city of Redlands. That's another side story. But you don't always get the redress that you need on the legal side, okay? So talk a little bit about diversity. Diversity is differing from one from another. And I've been around long enough where back in the day, we thought diversity was the goal, but now we know better. Because I can become more diverse. I can put 2 Black folks in the room. I can put two people that are non-white in the room, 3 people that are not, and I am diverse. Doesn't mean I'm inclusive, doesn't mean I'm equitable. It's a difference, okay? What we have to realize, all of us, is that we have a natural instinct to want to categorize. And none of us are immune to it. We all have this need to categorize. And I'm going to connect this to racism in a minute. Because one of the most important lessons we learned early on, if running for city council didn't teach me anything else, it taught me that everything flows from safety. I thought that it did, but now I'm really sure. Everything flows from safety. When you're young, you teach a child, your little cousin, your little kid, or whatever else, don't talk to strangers. Why? Because that's the way to keep them safe. And they're not old and mature enough to be able to do the work of nuance and discernment so that they know what's safe and what's not, where they have their own requirements and their own boxes to check, where they know that thing X or Y or Z is safe or not safe. So what you do is you say, listen, I made sure Julia didn't talk to strangers. But here's what happens. Like when Julia would get in trouble, she'd say, Daddy, you're not gonna believe what happened. I said, try me. I've been living in this house for a long time. Well, what had happened was, so what happens with us down the road as we get older, and we ought to be able to start doing that work because we're not 2 years old anymore. But guess what? We still want to feel safe, and we start with what we were taught. So we kick it with who we've been kicking it with. We see who we see. We're around people who we're around, and that's that. And it takes like college, or it takes camp, or it takes something else where that starts to change or not. I read my dear friend who's doing some great work in West Lynn, Oregon. She's the new mayor, Jules Walters, posted something that was cool. One of the facts that it listed is that 3/4 of white people have no non-white friends. 3/4. Now we're in a society where, everybody knows who, LeBron James is, and, everybody knows who The Weeknd is. Maybe I didn't know, but, everybody knows so many of these things that would imply that we're more, integrated and whatnot. But that's not the case. Okay. So diversity, we learn this thing about safety, and we don't get out of it because everything flows from us being safe, and we connect safety, read familiarity. So I'm going to hang with who I'm familiar with. Okay. And so, but the problem is, like we mentioned, diversity doesn't really solve injustice, and it doesn't create equity, which is basically injustice. So how do we get together and move things forward? From a background standpoint, I grew up, my first bridge builder, I grew around bridge builders. My first bridge builder was my dad. I didn't know he was a bridge builder, but he seemed like he got along with everybody and was okay with trying to convince everybody. I learned politics at a small restaurant that's still there, about 5 blocks west of where the uprising started in 1992 on Florence Avenue in South Central Los Angeles, called Tails Cafe. And so I knew names like Tom Bradley and Maxine Waters and Diane Watson, and I was 5 or 6 years old saying those names. Who's Maxine Waters, Daddy? Who's Kenneth Hahn, Daddy? You said you went to Kenneth Hahn's house and you knocked on the door and you talked about an issue. Who was that? So he was my first bridge builder. So, I go to school, I'm doing what I'm doing. And in 7th grade, I get bussed out to Paul Revere Junior High School, where I knew 2 people, my sister and my 6th grade teacher's daughter. That was it, starting brand new. And it is culture shock big time, okay? Because you look around and it's a whole lot of white folks. Keeping it real. But I learned that I was pretty good at bridge building too. And it's just as well that I had to be, because when you're in an environment, I think it's important to get everything that you can from an environment. And people will have different experiences. So, I go along, I do my thing, I start running for office. Actually, in 7th, 8th grade, I had a race in 8th grade that was a lot like this city council race, where I was an underdog and came close. Because in that case, Jill Brager knew everybody from 2nd grade, and I didn't. And she only beat me 302 to 284. I never forgot my classes. I never forgot my locker combination. I never forgot any of that. I can't even tell you how many votes I got in the city council race, but I know how many I got in the treasurer's race in 1984. In any event, I learned how to bridge build. Okay. And before long, I was winning elections and connecting to people and getting with folks. And my very best friend from all that time ago, and I'll tell you a story about him in a minute, Steve, is still on from 7th grade. Had me come to his bar mitzvah. He came to me 7th grade. He said, "Why don't you come to my bar mitzvah?" I said, "What is a bar mitzvah? I don't know nothing about no bar mitzvah. I don't know how you spell it. I don't know nothing." Okay. To be continued on that story. But once I got to college, and by the way, during high school, we had gone through some things. I had seen my dad deal with the criminal justice system, and we lived in a converted garage for a couple of years, and I was diagnosed with a condition that I still deal with today, and all those times. So I had some stuff going. But listen, and we were in a down thing when I was on my way to college, but I had a belief that I would be okay once I got to school because I knew how to communicate. That's always been my greatest skill. That's always been my passion. If there was a communication major at Redlands, that's what I would have done. I wouldn't have done political science. I would have done communications. So the thing that was mandatory for me and the thing that's mandatory for those of us that are in different groups is something that most people still don't do. And that's connect to other folks. So we can't expect without making those connections, without doing that ethical thing that I'm talking about, that we're going to make the progress that we need to make. So when I'm talking about creating safe spaces to have difficult conversations, I'm actually saying that we need to do something that tradition, society, and even the law do not necessarily make imperative for success. That's why I'm talking about ethics as much as I can, because we can only do it ethically. I'm asking you to do something that most people don't do, and I'm asking you to do something that's going to make you feel uncomfy and not touchy-feely. Real talk. Okay? So we're going along the road of creating safe spaces to have difficult conversations. Thing one I mentioned was recognizing ethics. The next thing I want to talk about is listening better, seeking dialogue. So here's a great story. So I met Steve in 7th grade and it was my first bar mitzvah, and we became real close, and we've really been in the foxhole for each other over the years. And his mom Janice, who loved hip hop and who loved rap, took me to my first rap concert. Okay. And I'm not going to say who was in the concert because I'm dating myself, because you won't know. Like, most of y'all will not know. Most of you were good ideas then. That's it. You won't know. Okay. But the next year she calls me, and you'll feel this. She said, Joe, listen, I am going to the Beastie Boys Run DMC Together Forever tour. Are you trying to roll? 45-year-old Jewish lady, exact words. Are you trying to roll? And I say, in the only word of French that I know, because I took Spanish, absolument, I'm trying to roll, right? But here was the deal. Janice was one. She would go, when I was over Steve's house, she would give us each $5 on Saturday night. She'd say, listen, y'all go fend for yourself, because I'm going dancing, honey. I'm going to the Hamburger Hamlet. I'm going to do my thing, whatever else. So she already had her seat to the concert. She said, you and Justin, one of our other friends, Steve stayed home from the concert. Anyway, Steve stayed home, okay? Me and Justin were going. She's like, we're going to get you tickets where we can, but I've already got front and center tickets for myself. So she gets me and Justin tickets, and if any of you have been at any amphitheater, let alone the Greek theater and the Greek amphitheater in LA, you can sit up to the left or up to the right where your line of vision is down this way, kind of like you're swooping in like a plane, like this. Okay? That's where me and Justin were. So we drive in the, in the BMW, and we get there and we go to the concert, and it was nuts. It was fantastic, right? And afterward, we compare notes. And Janice goes, oh my God, it was so fantastic. But did you see this part? Me and Justin looked at each other like, I didn't catch that. But Janice, I know that you thought this was dope. This was great when this happened. And she said, I didn't see that. So there were 2 or 3 different examples. And where we had been at the same concert, but she saw something that we didn't, and we saw something that she didn't. Which is funny. And I tell this story all the time. I speak about it, and people have probably heard me tell it. But it's what I like to call the amphitheater theory. And you've said it a million times. How you see things depends on from where you sit. So if we're having this discussion, you've got to recognize that somebody has a different perspective, and they're not necessarily evil just because they have a different perspective. They're just sitting somewhere else. One of the things I love to do when I'm on the road, couldn't really do it a whole lot, in the last year or so, is when I speak, I go do a speech, and then I go, let my hair down and go watch a movie. And I am nuts about sitting on the left side of the theater. That's me, okay? That is me all day long. I sit on the left side on an edge, left side, and I have to look to the right because that's the line of sight. Now, somebody that's on the right side has got to look to the left. I'm not mad at that person. Hopefully you're getting it, because, here's the deal. I mean, we having some serious conversations right now, and there's a difference between asking someone something with vitriol and with skepticism and cynicism. How in the hell could you vote for Donald Trump? It's a difference between asking somebody that way and saying, hey, you know, let's talk about what you were thinking about with that. Sometimes, now, again, I'm talking about the people that are coming with a willing heart, open ear, and good intentions. I'm not talking about people. And by the way, let me help you. I digress sometimes, and here's one. If you post it on Facebook to people you have no relational influence with, it's not going to go well most of the time. Okay, either because they don't know you, or because they're posting for different reasons. They're not posting because they want to be open and learn and understand. That's not the issue. So here we are, you know, sitting in our different areas of life, our different sides of the theater, and we're damning other people to hell that sit somewhere else. So it's kind of like, wow, how dare you have another point of view? So when we talk about those things, we've got to have those discussions and be as open as we can. And it's not easy. I get that. It's not easy, particularly with how segmented we are right now. And it looks like we have gotten more and more and more so all that time ago. Okay. So all those years ago, when I was at Northwestern, I went to law school and continued to be a bridge builder and did student government where I'm representing everybody. Redlands, University of Redlands back then, I don't know, might be a little bit more diverse, but I don't know that it's any more Black. It was about 4% Black all those years ago. I was the second student body president in 82 years at that time. There's some things that we did back then that are a lot more commonplace now, and kind of did some of the same stuff when I went to law school and went on. But inevitably, you're on fraternity row and you're having a conversation, you know. And for those of us, you know, sometimes, I mean, let's keep it real. Back in the libation days, you know, after a drink or two, I mean, I'm just being real, you know. And inevitably, somebody said it. They said it. They hit you with it. Joe, I've always wanted to have a conversation with somebody Black about this issue. And you can handle it one of two ways. You can say, doggone it, why do I always have to be the one to have this conversation? And it's another speech, but what we want to graduate to is being an ally and being an advocate where that one person doesn't always have to be the one to have that conversation or to lead it. Okay. Or I could listen and learn because somebody is open and they're asking because it seems like they're open to knowing. And I'm proud of the fact that we had a lot of conversations with people that have taken some of those things and used them in their lives. Because that's how things get changed. Things don't get changed because Donald Trump said something, because Joe Biden said something. It's because you have discussions with people that you have relational influence with about what Donald Trump said or about what Joe Biden said. So listening better is going to mean, and I gave the analogy example, but it's going to mean getting out of your comfort zone. Okay. And if you're less likely to get out of your comfort zone, just remember, some of us have to get out of our comfort zone every day. I mean, we make it look good. We make it like it's not, it's almost like it's not our, you know, it's almost like it is our comfort zone. It's not. Some of us do that. Okay. Is asking honest questions. In other words, asking it without cynicism, asking it like you really want to know the answer, and asking it like you actually really need to and contemplate a future with the person that you're asking. You're asking a question in a way that builds bridges or in a way that burns them. Seeking dialogue. hey, let's have a conversation about this. I can't tell you. Joy knows when I'm supposed to come right back from Starbucks and it takes me 45 minutes, I've gotten a conversation with somebody else. And sometimes it's just with a neighbor outside. I had one of my neighbors ask me, so Joe, all of this stuff that's related to, uh, you know, racial unrest and things like that. Can you explain that to me? Can we have a conversation about that? Just open, just wanted to have a conversation about it. So we had a lot of conversations in those years, and we continue to have those conversations. I don't know about you, but once all of this racial unrest started happening, this latest iteration of it, I had a lot of people reach out to me and say, hey, can I have a conversation with you about this? Some of them were calling me trying to understand what was happening with their kids a little bit better. Okay. So listening better, come out of your comfort zone, ask honest questions towards bridge building, toward a goal of bridge building, seeking dialogue. Now, let's talk about embracing balance. So I'm on the third thing that I want to do to steps to the goal, all right? Recognizing ethics, listening better, and seeking dialogue, embracing balance. And for those of us that don't want to be challenged in our point of view, this is bad news. While you seek to define and do justice, racial justice, any kind of social justice or whatever else, it's imperative to listen to other ideas and other perspectives. The best result is going to be one that has many contributing voices. So the only requirement for somebody to be in the mix is not that they agree with you, but that they have something to say and they're willing to contribute and to listen and to bridge build and to try to chart a path forward. You're not going to understand things any worse by listening to someone. I think that you understand things better. Quickly, I'll say, Luke, my friend Luke, said that he didn't see going out of your way to connect with people different than you is a matter of ethics. Well, again, amphitheater theory, how you see things depends on from where you sit. The point that I'm trying to make is that some of us have to do that to live and to survive. The fact is, if you don't see that as a matter of ethics, what that probably means is that you don't have to do it. And I don't want you to beat yourself up about it. But again, when you stand in a different place, you do what it is that you need to do. And I'm thrilled that you're here, and I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad we're having the conversation. I appreciate the comment. So embrace balance. So in other words, justice is going to be balanced, actually. It's not going to be everybody, necessarily agreeing. It's going to be geared towards getting towards a result, understanding each other better, and making some decisions about, well, what do we want for our community? And do we want things to stay the same? If you're doing well with how things stay the same, how things are, you may not want things to change. But what if you know that things need to change for the betterment or the improvement of situations and things around you? See, what Martin and a lot of these guys were about is understanding and connecting people with the plight of those that are the least of us. So you can lay low, sit tight, and be doing fine. Give to charities and things like that. You can help people without understanding them. That's the difference between sympathy and empathy. So what I'm saying is, to make progress on these issues, it's gonna involve some stepping out, and it's gonna involve embracing balance. And that's hard for people. A lot of times people equate it with, sides of the aisle and that kind of thing. I think that's hard for both sides of the aisle, because a lot of us on one side of the aisle feel like the other side of the aisle is evil. And that's easy to say. And that's why I'm giving you, I'm going to get into my next point, but I'm going to preview it by saying this. I want to finish up embracing balance. So there's some things that justice is, but here's some things that justice is not. Justice is not, and doesn't lend to justice, ignoring anything less than total agreement. It is not. So that's not a good look. Again, you're going to be strengthened by listening to other perspectives. and grabbing the good out of them, particularly if you have similar goals. And you might have to do the work to identify those goals. Identify them in the larger. Maybe it's in the micro, you can get to that, but start off with the macro. Safety. Everybody wants to feel safe. Nobody will tell you they don't want to feel safe where they are. And a lot of racism, a lot of what's going on. There's a culture war going on in this country, dare I say. And it is about feeling safe. It is about some people believing, dare I say, that it's a difficult thing, and it's not the greatest thing to be overrun by people that don't look like you or don't think like you. Now, people might disagree with that, but the signs are there. And what we see now are the things that happen when we are motivated by fear. Are you motivated by what you're scared of, or are you motivated by what you hope for? There's a difference. Okay. So embracing balance is not ignoring anything less than total agreement. It's not excluding grace and mercy, because people are imperfect. You're gonna make mistakes. Listen, I've been married for 22 years. I'm gonna be wrong about something by the end of the week. Okay. Also, too, justice is not disregarding courage that people show, courage that it takes to listen and to grow. Give people credit for that when they come out, when they want to have a discussion, when they're willing to be the unpopular one. Okay? And here's the other thing that I want to tell you that justice is about, or excuse me, steps to the goal. We talked about the first 3 steps. Here's the other one. And it's really important. A lot of people forget it. Do the work of nuance. When you have an ism, racism, sexism, you put everybody in it. You're not doing any work. You've given up. It's over with. Everybody's like this. All of you are here. And you might feel righteous indignation in doing it. This is where they ought to be. They did this or that and the other. They're evil. They're the devil with horns and a tail and a pitchfork. They belong there. It's risky, but it doesn't take any work to do that. That's the problem. If I did that, I wouldn't live where I live. I wouldn't work where I work. Some of my family, who's my family, wouldn't be my family. What a luxury to be able to do that at all. People on different sides of an issue. Often, too, here's another thing that's pretty fun, is that people often want other folks on the other side of the issue to do work of nuance, but not you. Talk about policing, for instance. You know, on the one hand, well, I feel way X. How do you feel, Joe, about Black Lives Matter? Well, talking about the concept, the principle, the movement, the organization, the politics. Which one? I hate to answer a question with a question. What are you talking about when you say that? It's hard to put and again, a lot of people will put Black Lives Matter in a category because it makes them feel more safe and more comfortable to do it, one way or the other. So you, person X, not to demonize anybody, person X, you've got Black Lives Matter in the category. When you put them all there, you won't do the work of nuance, but you want me to remember that not all police officers are bad. Which they aren't, by the way. I think we've got really good police. Chris Catron is a friend. I've known Travis Martinez for 30 years. I think we do much better. But what's good for the goose is good for the gander. We all have to do the work. Let's not just put people in a category. So What does that mean? I gave you some thoughts, and I'm going to ponder these questions again. But steps to the goal. We talked about recognizing ethics and listening better and seeking dialogue and embracing balance and doing the work of nuance. What does that mean for Redlands? I think what it means for Redlands is the same thing it means everywhere else. Press ahead to make realizations. The goal can't be, and Redlands is a great place. We came to Redlands on purpose. We looked to come to Redlands, my wife and I. In a lot of ways, great place. But you can't just say we're Redlands and therefore. Everything is everything. We're not the city to the left. We're not the city to the right. We're safer. We're less racist. We're whatever. But, put it in the box. But, fill it in. We still have work to do if you want to get better. I'm excited about, the proclamation of race as a public health issue. Hopefully HRC can be the engine to that, because it needs an engine. It needs to get on the road, and it needs to go somewhere. But whether people say legislation, whether people say this, or they want to talk about this or that and the other, it all starts with conversations that are based on ethical duties. It all starts with that. So in that way, what we need to know is that we can start pressing ahead, making realizations just by having a conversation. Just by having conversations. So are you having conversations with people that you haven't had conversations with? People you don't want to have conversations with? People you told yourself you'd never have conversations with? And circumstances have changed things. It's interesting, my daughter talks about how I told her, I used to love to go to Friday Night Lights and see the football games. We're at Rev with Kurt Brooke and the whole thing. And I would tell her after the game, tell this person he was great. And she's like, I don't talk to him. I'm like, but you follow each other on Instagram, right? So I always ask, how many of us, how many students, how many people follow people on Instagram? They follow you, you don't talk. Everybody raise their hand. Which means we have the ability to connect, but we're not more connected. We're looking through the window at each other. That's why it's so much more dangerous for us to go on Redlands Government and Politics and let that be the impression that everybody has of us, because we're not connected any other way. We are actually less connected. How many of us before COVID were walking around a whole lot of people within 6 feet and we didn't say a word to them? There was a lot of that going on, right? So we can start doing that work now. And could it and should it become discussions that lend to policy and legislation and things like that? Absolutely. But I think that you need, but when we talk about policy and we talk about getting laws passed and things like that, now you have to persuade. Now you have to persuade. Now you have to package. But it really starts with discussions. So let me ponder these questions again for you, and hopefully you think a little bit differently about them, got a little bit more thought, and then I'll answer a couple of questions that I see in here, and whatever you guys want to do I don't know if you guys have a full schedule or what we asked about before is, how do you see your ethical duty in your life and in your community as it pertains to issues related to justice? Because we all have that duty. I would say that a mantle has fallen on each and every one of us to be participants and or leaders and moving our society forward, our community, our world. Are you in your comfort zone as to justice issues, including racism? Because you're on one side of it or the other, whether you're saying anything about it or not. I mean, you already there. You at the ball, hell, you might as well dance. When you see somebody different that's successful, do you see an exception? You look at me, I'm done pretty good. Not the cutest, but in fact, a lot of people say, Joe, you sound like Denzel Washington, and I've never understood it, particularly because nobody says I look like him. But when you see me, or when you close your eyes and listen, because I sound like Denzel and I don't look like him, what does it make you say? Does it make you say I'm more the exception than the rule? I'm more miraculous than I am indicative? Does it make you say there's more people like him? Or does it make you say he's not like the others? And if you're not sure what your answer is, look at your mix. Because you're saying it by what you do. You sit on a board and you help an organization, and you help folks in the organization. One of the things we're doing with the DEI committee at Redlands Family Services, which does fantastic work. Kyra is just, she's Jesus. She's fantastic. We're graduating from being sympathetic to being empathetic. Why? Because we actually want to understand the people we help. So when you see somebody different that's successful or whatever else, do you see exceptions or do you see possibilities? Or are you somebody that's more informed? We're in an educated community. You're more informed, but you're less inclined. You okay on the sidelines? Okay. Finally, will you be moved by conscience or will you be moved by circumstance? You know, you look at something like the Montgomery bus boycott all those years ago, which is basically the first big boycott of the civil rights movement of those years. 75% of the people that rode the bus were Black. So they all stopped riding the bus. Okay. We all know what happened with Rosa Parks, et cetera. They stopped riding the bus. It wasn't necessarily conscience that changed that policy. Conscience is an internal circumstance that says this is the wrong thing to do. And even if I'm ahead of my time, I think this needs to change. But circumstance, nobody's riding the bus. It choked them economically, and it went to court. And the court decided, and the Supreme Court confirmed what the lower court did, that everybody ought to be able to ride the bus and sit where they want to sit. But in the civil rights movement, there was an incredible notion or portion that was dealt with because of conscience. This is why it was important for those non-violent methods to be used, because they knew it would be very, very powerful. There's a whole lot of folks that maybe didn't want to sit next to white people, Black people, maybe didn't want to live with them or whatever else, but they wouldn't sick dogs on them. They'd never done that. They wouldn't put water hoses on them. Conscience. But circumstance was there too. They were choked economically. So everybody can and must do justice for our success. Pick your ism and go after it. Environmental racism. I wouldn't be surprised if ultimately our firm got involved in environmental racism, got involved in education. What's nice is that we can get involved in what we want to get involved in. We can choose wrongs to right and to right them. Let's be inspired by the possibilities. We got to think about what's possible. We really want to have that discussion. We think about what's possible. It's a long road, but start from where you are, because what I'm trying to do is we all have an obligation and duty. You don't have to be Martin Luther King to change this thing, to do your part. You don't have to be John Lewis to do your part. It's a long road, but start from where you are. Open heart, listening ear, and good intentions. And have the discussion with someone like you need to live with them afterward. Towards bridge building. You can't burn bridges and then wonder why you're swimming. Treat it like you need to live with them afterward. Okay. I'm going to quickly answer this question here. I don't know if other people have questions or what you guys want to do with your format. But those are my thoughts. Somebody asked, what is your perspective on generational perspectives and bridging that gap? I think that it's always there. I think that we have to listen the same way. And I feel like I'm a little older in this. We have to listen the same way they listen to us. There's a couple backstories. If you get a chance to read the book, I'll put it in here. Hey, thanks, Luke. I appreciate you being on. An Easy Burden by Andrew Young. It talked about the personalities in the civil rights movement. And he talked about how much they resented older civil rights leaders, NAACP, Urban League. They really resented these preachers in their 20s that were coming along and bringing it straight to the people and getting attention. In fact, one of the stories that they tell is a lot of them did not want the March on Washington to happen. But when it became apparent that the March on Washington was going to happen, they decided they wanted to speak first, some of the other people, because back then you didn't have satellite. So film had to be flown to New York to run on television. So they said if they spoke early, they would make it on television. They spoke early. Martin spoke later. He spoke off the cuff for 14 minutes, and you haven't seen anybody else's speech. So what I try to do, Julia does this a whole lot. She says, Daddy, they all say that. They all think that. I'm like, who is they? She's like, the Twitter sphere. I'm like, well, that's not it. That's not all of us. Okay. So I would say, I don't think that it's rocket science. I think that you just want to do some listening, do the work to find some commonalities between what they did and what we did. So like, for instance, and I'm speaking from my perspective. I know that there are many other issues out here and equity issues. I'm talking about race, no disrespect to any other issue out there. But we always, we have the situation where I tell Julia all the time, I said, well, do your friends take any thought to the fact that, they go out and they march and, and right now Northwestern is kind of going down because they don't want police on campus. They don't want them there. There's the abolitionist movement. She just did a story about it, by the way. And I said, well, think of it this way. You guys get pissed and then you go to a restaurant and you chart strategy. Then your parents come into town and they stay at the hotel, or you do. Things that some folks didn't do. Joy's aunt, our aunt, Josie Johnson, who did Joy's first meeting when she started doing this book club. She's 90 years old, was at the March on Washington. And they talked about integrating lunch counters and all the things that they did that we all take for granted. There's so many things that even the young folks take for granted that are easy to take for granted because they're just so fundamental now that we didn't have then. As optimistic as they were, Josie told me, she said, Joe, I got to tell you, I never thought I'd see the Black president because I know how much had to happen for us to get to that point. So let's remind folks, young folks, let them do their thing. Let them do their thing. Let them make their own decisions. Present alternatives if they ask for them, but let them go through their own processes. It's a little bit of a different thing, but Joy is an expert at letting me find out things for myself. And by the way, just like they found out with Martin, who was in his 20s, and Andy and Bevel and Jesse and all these other guys, we'll find out what they have too. We'll find out that they know how to use technology to change things, to affect policy and all those. I know y'all can do some things we can't do. I understand that. But what we did and people before us did, in a way, helps with that. So just build the bridge. That's what I would say. So any other questions? On purpose, I didn't want to talk over anybody's head. I wanted to hopefully give you some things that you can and make it bite-sized. Okay. Shaheen?
I really enjoyed your conversation, and I liked the point where you say how racism is something in your heart, but discrimination is action, racism in action. And those things are sometimes, in your practice, you see those things are very hard to prove in a court of law.
Oh, yeah.
But they exist as we know. And the question I have for you is, since in HRC and also at the Interfaith Council, And also I'm part of the group that Roger started, that he's also in this, he's also, I saw him in the participation list. We are trying to come up with ideas on how to start this conversation, how to start this dialogue. So can you give us some pointers that you have seen that have worked for you, with the thing in mind that, we are not here to just tell people you're wrong. Sometimes they, like you said, it's from, you're seeing from where you are, and you just have to bring them to another level to see what they missed. So just some pointers on action items. And then I just wanted to share something with everyone. There is a there's a there's a saying of Prophet Muhammad, who we believe is one of the prophets of God. And he said, when you see injustice, there are three levels how people react to them. And actually, he relates it to the three levels of faith. And he said, when you see something, you do something about it. That's the highest level of faith. But then there'll be people who will not be that courageous, and they'll see it and they'll understand that something wrong is happening. They may not do anything about it, but they'll say something. They can ask some people for help. So that's the second level of faith. And the lowest level of faith is when you see something, you just, in your heart, you felt there's something wrong, but you didn't do anything about it. You didn't go ask for help, and you didn't do anything. So, when we, and I'm sure there are similar things in every religion, or even people who don't follow any religion, and using those kind of ideas that already exist among us, we can pull different people from different walks of life in our community, different interfaith and no faith, but there are commonalities. But how do we get people to start talking?
That's actually connected to a question that my man Doug Everhart asked, about the fact that we live in such an extremist world. How do we find middle ground to get these conversations? That's why I talk about relational influence quite a bit. And the relational influence can be with people that you know, or people that you are joined with in an endeavor. So you both go to school. You both work at Starbucks. You both ride the bus. It happened you both like Drake. Stevie Wonder, I've had opportunity to kind of hang out and chop it up and look it over with him. Man, these guys are often, Marvin Gaye, what's going on? These guys were often the bridge to start these conversations. So there is relational influence, and then there's sometimes you're joined in an endeavor, or you find yourself in the same space. Okay. I think, Shaheen, that every person at each level has something that they can add. So again, if I'm not demonizing the person, so like, for instance, everything happens for a reason. I haven't necessarily been known to be the guy that's talking about race and had race first. As a matter of fact, my parents told me to be very conscious about that. I was not always that guy, but I was always observant and doing what I do now. The timing is right to make, and one of the things I noticed, and I couldn't necessarily explain it, but sometimes people can hear the same thing from me that they heard from this next person next to me, maybe person of color, whatever else, but they would listen to me, or they would come to me and ask me about what that person said. So we all have our role to play. There might be people that would have argued that I didn't say enough years ago, maybe. And I'm still having backstories. I just had a conversation with a dear friend, Jim Weedman, who I ran against for student body president all those years ago. And he said, Joe, I never told you this, but there were people that came to me and said, you just won because you were Black. But nobody else was winning back then because they were Black. So I say that to say we shouldn't beat ourselves up because we haven't always been the one to jump up and say, because I want you to understand that there's manner and timing too. You can say the right thing at the wrong time. And if Julia's listening, she's right here with me because I talk to her about this all the time. And I tell her that the best gift she has is that she understands manner and timing like we do. You can say the right thing at the wrong time and completely miss it. Be totally well-intentioned, but be utterly ineffective. So there might be people on this phone, on this call right now, that have not had this conversation. And if so, please shoot me a message, an instant message, private message, or whatever else. But this conversation is 30 years in the making. 30 years. I came to Redlands in 1989. 30 years. So what I think we can do is start with where we are in terms of the things that have us connecting to each other, whether it's class, whether it's work, and all these other things. Now, you gotta be kind of careful about talking about politics at work. But really, I'm not talking about politics. I'm talking about how people treat each other fundamentally. I'm talking about valuing and validating the next person, even though you don't totally 100% agree with them. Even though you don't get them, you don't understand, you like really don't understand, like, hell, I really don't understand. So we have to make a difference. And I think similarly, Priya just asked, how do we overcome being painted with a broad brush? Sometimes you don't with some people, not right away, but you keep doing the work. You keep doing what you're supposed to do. And I do believe in my optimism and my infinite crazy optimism. I believe that you'll get opportunities to connect with people in ways that they didn't think you connect and that you didn't think you connect. I'm still having conversations with folks from college and from high school. Man, you don't know what happened all these years ago. There's something that you said or something that we did, and we had that conversation, and I really appreciate it or whatever else. People are taking that and applying it to their lives. So you got to play the long game too. It's not over just because the person you wanted to get elected didn't get elected. It's not over because Joe lost for city council. It's not over because thing X didn't happen the way that I wanted to, or thing Y didn't happen the way that I wanted to. There is a lot of vitriol. There is a lot of heat that people are bringing towards each other. But if you can pick somebody off based on relational influence or based on a shared endeavor and start to understand, get in a place of conversation where you can start to talk about the underlying macro goal that has them thinking and saying what they're thinking and saying. I'll give you 10 to 1 that safety is right there or close to it. So I sit here on the amphitheater. I am influenced by what my mom and my dad thought, by what they said, by my dad's experience with police. My dad was in the criminal justice system. By where I went to school, by the relationships that we had with people that didn't look like us, by the way that we were treated by different people or whatever else. And sometimes that treatment is positive, not necessarily negative. And so the person next to me, of course, they'd have the experience too. Listen, if they never had problem with police, and you tell them, I remember in the 90s, we were talking about what was going on with Rodney King or whatever else. There's a lot of folks that just could not conceive it. How could you possibly, Rodney King should have laid down and stayed still. When the fact of the matter is, back in those times, at those days, police officers were chasing Black men in Simi Valley that lived in Simi Valley like it was going out of style. That's a fact. Johnny Cochran sued bad cops for many years before he ever won. And I'm not here to bash cops and talk about bad cops. I'm just saying that perspective is out there and it comes from a place. It's not imaginary. But be real good about your manner and timing. Instinctively, you'll understand when you have the opportunity to connect to somebody. And it might be because you helped them. Church that I went to, they had missionaries standing on the border of Syria and Turkey. Sometimes people running for their lives with just what they had in their hands. And one of the things that I find that you can do to get folks to listen to you, it creates it, is that if you actually have a heart to help and you help them without preconditions, and you help them before you figure out what party they voted for or where they sit on the amphitheater or how they feel about this issue or that issue, you're planting a seed. Again, we're talking about being ethical. Sometimes well, doggone, that's not going to be reciprocated. You know, when you're young and you at the club, you might not want to go ask somebody to dance if you really think they're going to say no. It's reciprocated. Is there an exchange? Is there? It takes a lot of maturity to put something and to be vulnerable and put yourself out there. But what I would submit to you is that many of us do that all day, every day. I mean, very rarely do I go to court, and I'm not the only Black person in court. Somebody told me the other day, I didn't believe this. My friend Kamala Gray, who's a family law lawyer, great family law lawyer, by the way. She said, she's the head of the Richard T. Fields Bar Association. There were no Black judges in Riverside and San Bernardino County until 2000 and 2001. Real. Right? Julia's first Black teacher at Northwestern. First one. She had others of color, and there were Black teachers, but she didn't have any. So how can we feel a certain way about people without having experiences with them? And the only indication we have is what folks post, who we don't know, and what we see on television. Images. You got to do the work to look at George Floyd and to make sure that you sympathize and that you empathize, even though he had a criminal past. You got to do that work. But we all are more likely to do that work with people that we're familiar with, people that we sympathize with, and often that means people that we look like. That's real. Any other questions?
Looks like Anna has her hand up. Did you have something?
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you so much for coming and doing this presentation. I think that this is a great point that on a personal level, right, the people we trust or the people we know, we can have those conversations with as the Human Relation Commission and creating those spaces that you said. And I think that we are interested in creating those spaces in our city, but how do we bring people in? You know, I think people here, anybody who is attending, like you made the assumption, is probably interested in that conversation, but it needs to expand beyond. And I don't know, how do we invite those people in?
Gosh, it's not easy, particularly in this environment. But I would say one person at a time. If somebody has enough courage to be in your group, to be in your mix, to have discussions with you, you have to make sure that they never regret it. You have to make sure that we're treating them with respect and that we're treating them with deference and we're listening to them and making sure we're extracting out what it is they're trying to say. So when they say something, somebody says something, say, let me make sure I understand you. You said this, this, and this. Now that's a different goal, by the way, than policy, than legislation, all of which are great goals, I think. But I think a big piece is people doing the work, and we're going against some countervailing forces, right? Like what's on television, maybe what our mom taught us, maybe what our dad taught us, whatever. There's some countervailing forces for sure, but often I think the best thing we can do is create an environment to have conversations where people really do some listening and then make some related goals. The goal might not necessarily be legislation right away, might not necessarily be policy. Maybe it's, and I've had some discussions with folks about this before, maybe it's some kind of code of ethics or principles or something like that. Maybe we're all upset about what we see happening in national politics. And we want to put together a code of ethics that everybody then, and see if infrastructure like that exists. See if you can find agreement like that. I'm not saying it is easy. And once we get back to being able to connect from a health standpoint, then let's do that. Maybe it's a separate interest. Maybe it's a book club. Maybe it's a soccer club. I mean, you know, I'm not Cornell West here. I'm not coming in real high. What I'm saying is, if you give yourself an opportunity to be in the mix with people, ultimately you start having discussions and having conversations, and people understand each other a little bit better, a little bit more open to it, because they've seen a side of you that will allow them to be trusting and vulnerable, or at least take steps in that direction. That's the way that I always do it. I think that legislation and tangibles and things like that are all good. Maybe think about some non-political tangibles. That can be very hard as well. Now, I think the code of ethics should be non-political. I really do. So I'm not saying that that's easy, and I'm glad to talk to you about it more, but I think if you create opportunities for people to get in the mixes, and I agree with Eddie's point, is that the most understanding, the biggest thing you can do is let folks know they're in a safe space. If people know that they're in a safe space, conversations will flow, and that's the biggest thing. And guess what? Redlands government and politics may not be a safe space. Hello. People are just banging on each other, right? And they post and this and that, and this one did this and this one did that, or whatever else. Nothing's going to get done from that. Now the person is the person that posted some stuff that they shouldn't have posted on Redlands government and politics. How dare they? So that's a form of bridge burning. And, have your expectations be realistic too. Social media in and of itself allows us to forget one of the key things that people that cared about us taught us. Think before you speak. We don't. Sometimes we're hot. Somebody posts something. Oh my God. Oh, I got to jump on them. I got to get on them. I got to do it. And running for office started to get me out of that a little bit. Or maybe I'll post posts in a private group. But most of the time, not that I don't post about politicians, I tend to try to make an ethical point. It doesn't always work, but I tend to try to make an ethical point where if somebody is coming out and banging on me, now I know that, well, they're not ready to have that conversation. And that's fine. I don't take it personally. But what I do want to do, and what we all want to do, and I think, is get out of the way and let people make their realizations. By that, I mean, when I want to make a point, if I think that it's a good point, I don't want to stand in front of you to make it. I'm not going to stand in front of you and say, Anna, here's the point. Look at me. No, not look at me. Let me sit next to you and let's look at what I think the goal ought to be. If there's a difference between me and you, maybe it's that I think that this is the goal. But at the very least, I'm not going to get in the way of you seeing the goal. And part of that means letting you be you. Now, again, if it was simple, we would put a patent on it and sold it or whatever else. I'm not saying that it's easy. It's hard, but it's going to happen one person at a time. It's not going to be people going to listen to a 30-minute speech and they're like, oh my God, I'm going to go change everything. Forgiveness is one of the most difficult things to deal with. And there has to be a decision made to forgive to start to get you along the process. These things are still processing stuff. You don't snap your fingers and you're there. Even with a good speech. So. Other questions?
Thank you so much. That's great.
Oh, you're welcome. And I'm looking forward to working with you more on that. However, I can be helpful. I'm glad to do that.
Me too.
DZ says she's quitting Facebook after this speech. That's funny. Well, I am thrilled for the opportunity to talk with each of you. Thank you, Donna, for your comments as well. A lot of folks gave me some neat comments and everything. But let's continue to have justice discussions because it's a long term. I didn't come to Redlands to tear it down. I came to build it up. Every situation I'm in. So you know, that's what we're trying to do. I'm proud of it. You know, and, you know, so let's just be intentional about what it is that we want to do, knowing that it's going to take some work, knowing that Rome wasn't built in a day, but we can get on the road. You know, some of the conversations that I've had recently are, you know, decades and years in the making, but they'll be triggered by events. You know what I mean? They'll be triggered by events. Something will happen and it causes the opportunity for a conversation. So if we're ready, one of the things the Bible talks about is being instant in season and out of season. But if we're ready, then maybe we can have that conversation. You don't have to be perfect, but again, open ears, willing heart, and good intentions. Not everybody out there has good intentions. That's real. But for those that do, if we start there and we're okay with getting out of our comfort zone, maybe still just a toe at a time, you know, then we can start to make some progress. I have my bio up for people that want to see the work we're doing. We're real excited about it. I'm having a lot of fun with it. You know, but you know, let's continue to be a help to each other and move along the road. Okay. Thank you guys. Appreciate you.